All right, it's 1 o'clock, so let me get started. My name is Jay Patel, and along with my wife, Marina Patel, we are the owners of Visual Wilderness. Ever since the pandemic hit, we've been putting on these free webinars, info sessions, and to go along with it, we are also offering a sale. So today, what we are going to talk about is in-sharp focus for nature photography. Now, of course, the concepts covered is for nature photography, but you can use this for pretty much any kind of photography you're doing, wildlife photography, macro photography, and you'll see some examples from a number of different things. All right, and just so that everybody knows that we have on sale are 3 tutorials that cover sharp focus. 2 of them are field tutorial, 1 is post-processing. So if you guys are interested, go check out our special offers page, and I'll put a link in here in a little bit. And it's on sale for next 48 hours, I believe, just a little over 48 hours. And then after that, we're going to go and move on to the next topic. Also, coming up, we have 2 big events planned that are coming up. Probably more than that, but at least 2 that are already planned. One is Black Friday sale. We're going to talk about creating impact on Black Friday. So there'll be a series of online classes live, and we have some phenomenal speakers lined up, photographers, and they're going to show you how to create impact with a variety of different things, how to create impact with nature photography, how to create visual impact, how to create impact with light, with Photoshop, with night photography, with dodging and burning. So there's a series of speakers that are going to be speaking about creating impact in a number of different ways for nature photography. So very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. Since the speaker set is going to be very diverse, everything from, hopefully we'll be covering from travel photography to macro to nature photography, landscapes, and even some drone shots if I can have one of our speakers speak about drone photography. All right. So enough said of what's coming up. Let's get started. The first session of this is pre-recorded. So I'm going to start by saying, share my screen. So I'm going to stop the share over here so you guys can see me live. And all right, and I'm going to start the recording. So give me a second. So let's see, share screen. All right, now I want you guys to tell me, can you guys hear the sound for the video? Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Today we are here to talk about focus. Now, the first thing we teach our students is exposure. The second skill set we teach our students is how to focus. Now, focus is also a technical skill set, but I find that students have more difficulty getting the focus right than getting the exposure right. Because focus not only depends on your camera setting, but it also depends upon the environmental factors that you're trying to photograph. For example, the wind and the haze, and whether your subject is moving or whether your camera is moving. So let me walk you through some of the things we teach our students so that they can master focusing techniques. Now, in order to master focusing techniques, first thing you need to know is what focus settings and modes are available on your camera. Now, every camera has slightly different amount of focus settings and slightly different kinds of focusing modes available. So the best thing to do is consult your camera manual and make sure you know what kind of focus settings and what kind of focus modes are available. The second thing you need to know is, once you know what focus settings are, where should you focus? Now, this is an incredibly critical skill that does not have a good workflow. The reason being, where to focus is going to be different depending on the photos you're trying to take. So we're going to talk about why your photos don't come out sharp, even if your focus is just right. And then the last thing we teach our students is advanced focusing techniques, such as focus blending, focus stacking, how to use hyperfocal distance in the field. So these advanced focus workflows will allow you to be creative and to overcome challenges that you see in the field. So to master focus, you need to start out by learning about focus settings and focus modes. Here's a video where I take you to some of the focus settings and focus modes that I have on my camera. Hi guys, welcome to beautiful Hawaii once again. And this time we are here to talk about focus. How to get everything sharply in focus, or how to get focus at the right place and come away with that fantastic photograph. All right, so let's start this lesson with how do you set up your camera in correct focus modes. Now when you're talking about focus modes, there are three things you need to remember. The first thing you have to remember is whether you want to use autofocus or manual focus. So let me show you how that works. So I have my Sony mirrorless cameras over here, and in this case, I can go into my focus mode settings, and there are a variety of options as you can see over here. And one of the options I can select over here is manual focus. Now when I set manual focus, you can see that little M comes up. And in this case, now the ring in front of my camera controls the focus, as you can see from back of my camera. Now, you can adjust this, but using a live view, you don't have really accurate idea of where the manual focus is. So in order to assist in manual focusing, my camera has a really cool focusing technique built onto it. And the way I can do it is, I can zoom into a particular area. So let's suppose I want to focus on left side of this little rock over here. I can position my focusing square over there. I can zoom in, and then I can use my camera's focusing ring to get that particular area sharply in focus. So this kind of manual assist is absolutely essential when you're using a DSLR or mirrorless camera and using a manual focus. Now, not all cameras will have this manual assist. Some older cameras didn't have it. So if you're purchasing a camera and you want to use it for manual focusing system, make sure that you purchase one with a manual focus assist. When you are in a manual focus mode, a lot of times other modes of focusing are disabled. So auto tracking or selection of area of where you can go and focus is disabled. So let's go into autofocus mode and see how those things work. All right, so I'm going to go over here once again, and I'm going to put my camera, and you can see that in my camera, AF stands for autofocus. So now that you're in automatic focusing mode, you have two other choices that come into play. What area you want to select to focus. And the second choice is whether you want either continuous or single shot focusing. All right, so let's take a look at what happens in case of the area selection first. So as you can see, my camera has a number of different focusing areas that you can select from. In any given camera, DSLR, mirrorless cameras, focusing sensors are sort of scattered around your frame. Now, I can do a really wide focusing zone. Now, when I select that, what happens is my camera will automatically select the focusing point that it thinks I want to focus on. All right. Now, people would say, why is that important? Because it may just focus randomly any place. Well, in certain cases, when you're shooting wildlife, it may become relevant to use this mode. Okay. The second thing you can do is that if you don't want that, in landscape photography, you can select a really narrow, flexible point of focus. Now, some cameras, some advanced cameras like my camera has more focusing options. So as you can see from the assisted focusing zone is I have selected a large focusing square. Well, I can select a medium focusing square or a small focusing square. And when I do that, now my focusing square becomes really small. So in this case, I can precisely focus where I want to focus. In landscape photography, what is most likely to happen is you're going to select a focusing point of where you want to focus, and that is where you're going to concentrate your focusing efforts on. So this particular small focusing zone is very, very good. I can actually say I want to focus on this particular area of the rock, move my focusing square, and focus over there. All right? So that's the second focusing setting option you have, whether you want to select a really wide focusing area or whether you want to select a pinpoint focusing area. In almost all cameras, these focusing areas will vary as how they are scattered around, but the basic setting of selecting a focusing area is going to be the same. So every DSLR or mirrorless cameras will have some choices where you'll be able to select focusing zones. Once you have selected focusing area, other thing you have to determine is whether you want single shot or automatic focusing. So let's see how you can put this. So in my case, I can actually say instead of just automatic focusing, I can go ahead and select a continuous focusing. Now, in case of continuous focusing, what is going to happen is that when I half press my shutter release, the camera is going to focus where the focusing square is located. If I move my camera, for example, a little bit, then that focusing will move as well. Now, the key here is that in continuous mode, as long as you're holding down the shutter release, the camera will continuously focus. Okay? Now, one of the cool things that happens in a continuous mode is if you have selected a wide area of focusing. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead over here, go in here, and instead of a single focusing point, I'm going to put it in a wide area. Now my camera will automatically decide where it wants to focus. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important if you're trying to focus and the bird or the subject is moving across the scene. In this case, you want to make sure that your focusing continuous mode is enabled and it's going to track your subject. All right, so now that you know the three things you need to learn about focusing, let's see how this works for a DSLR camera. So now that you know your focus settings and focus modes are available on your camera, you need to figure out where to focus. Rule of the thumb says that you should focus third of the way into the frame. Well, that works in some cases, but oftentimes that doesn't work. The challenge in getting focus right also depends on the environment you're shooting. What if your subject is moving? How are you going to focus on a moving subject? The other challenge with focus settings is there are multiple focus settings that can produce similar results. Or sometimes there's only one focus setting that will produce optimal results. So how do you choose where to focus and what focus settings to use will depend on what you're trying to capture. So here's a video that I took of a moving gecko in Hawaii where I wanted to capture the eyes of the gecko sharply in focus. We are here in this environment, which is hot and humid, to catch those beautiful green geckos. Here's a gecko. I found one which was sitting quite high up. So how do you set focusing on this? Well, first thing what you don't want to do is you don't want to set your focusing on an area mode. So if you select focusing point on area mode, you don't know where the camera is going to focus. So I'm going to go ahead and select a focusing, which is single point focusing. So now you can see that little square. When I press the shutter release halfway, it will focus on that square. Then the second thing I'm going to do is once I set that, I'm going to go ahead and to move that focusing square so it lines up with the gecko's eyes. And sometimes you can't line it up correctly, so you do the best you can. Then when I want to take a shot, I can go ahead and take a shot. Now, I have selected a continuous focusing rather than a single shot focusing. So why is that? Well, remember, gecko is not a static subject. Its head moves. You can see it licking things on the leaf. So if the head moves slightly, the eye will be out of focus. So what you want to do is you want to select a continuous focus. Another thing you can do to get sharp focus on the eye is use focus magnification button. But in order to use focus magnification button, on some cameras like mine, you cannot use the focus in a continuous mode. You have to set it a single shot. So now that I've set my camera to single shot, I can zoom in to the gecko's eyes and then use my shutter release to see if it's actually focused. Now it's nice and sharp, and I can go ahead and take the shot. Now, when you preview this shot and you zoom in, you will notice that the gecko's eyes, where the focus should be, is perfectly defined. So focus magnification with single shot works as long as the gecko is sitting there and not moving too much. If it is moving too much, then put it on continuous mode. But in both cases, I ended up using a single focusing point to focus exactly where I want the focus to be. In this case, eye of the gecko. Now, once you've mastered your focus settings and your focus techniques, and you got everything right, doesn't mean your photos will come out sharp. There are a number of factors that come into play when sharpness of your photo is concerned. One of the factors that is really challenging is how to deal with wind. So you have to make sure that along with your focus, your shutter speed is high enough to get everything sharp, if that is your objective. The other challenges you may run into in trying to get everything sharply in focus is motion of your camera. We almost always use a tripod when we're trying to take landscape photos. You can also have blurry photos because the subject does not fall into the plane of the focus. Now, this is particularly true for macro photos. One other challenge we often run into is limitation of our lenses. If you're using an extreme aperture, whether it's really wide or whether it's really narrow, then the lens performance is not optimal. So when you zoom in to 100%, you may find that your photos are not quite as sharp as what you expect them to be. So here's a video where I explain some of these factors that impact the sharpness in your photos. The primary purpose of focusing is to get things sharply in focus, whether it is just a narrow part of your frame or whether it's the entire frame. But you have to remember that focusing is not the only thing that affects your sharpness. Even though you may have all the focus settings and focus modes selected correctly, your photos may not come out sharply. So why not? Here are a few things that will make your photos blurry. Motion of your subject. Second thing is motion of your camera. If you accidentally bump your camera or if you're not using a tripod, it will be difficult for you to get things sharply in focus. So use a tripod and use a 2-second timer. And if your shutter speed is lower than inverse of the focal length that you're shooting with, then 2-second timer will prevent the camera shake and will get everything sharply in focus. Now, 2-second timer is not the only solution. Sometimes you want to fire the shot at a precise moment. For example, when we were shooting lava, we wanted to capture that explosion at the right moment. And having a 2-second timer did not help us. In those cases, what we ended up doing was using remote release. Now, remote release allows you to fire the shot on the cameras whenever we want it. So you can use that remote release to capture precisely focused shots whenever that explosion is taking place. Now, there's one other thing you have to watch out for when you're using a DSLR. It's called mirror vibrations. In a DSLR, what happens is there's a mirror that directs the light from the lens to your viewfinder, so you can take a shot by putting the camera to your eyes. Now, when that mirror moves out of the way, when you press the shutter release, it creates small amount of vibrations on your camera. And what you need to do is, to eliminate the vibration, you need to move the mirror out of the way, wait for a little bit of time, and then take the shot. Well, a lot of DSLR today have built-in mechanism where you can put and activate mirror lockup. So mirror lockup, along with a 2-second timer delay, will eliminate the vibration. And the way it works is like this. When you press the shutter release and start taking the shot, the mirror will move out of the way. 2-second timer will start. And once the timer expires, it takes the shot. So those 2 seconds that it gives the mirror to settle down, hopefully will be long enough for you to make sure that the vibrations of the mirror have been eliminated. When it is time to get shots sharply in focus, think about these parameters along with your focusing options that you have with your camera, and use focus assist and a whole lot of creativity to be able to get things that you want sharply in focus to be sharply in focus. All right, go out there, experiment, and practice. The more you practice, the more you're going to be able to think about all those other parameters that affect sharpness of the image. Now, once you are very comfortable with your focus settings and focus modes, and you can pretty much get most normal photos sharply in focus, you need to explore advanced focusing techniques to get around some of the unusual challenges you'll face in the field. One of them is depth of field. If your depth of field is too narrow and there's nothing you can do in your camera to get around it, you can resort to focus stacking, where you take a number of different photos and put them together in Photoshop. The second technique that we often rely on is hyperfocal distance. Hyperfocal distance allows us to use this technique as set it and forget it technique. When the sky is going spectacularly crazy, we can set our focus using hyperfocal distance and then concentrate on composition and finding interesting foreground elements so we can get multiple photos with the same focus settings. Here's a video from our hyperfocal distance course where Verena is explaining how she uses set it and forget it technique in the field.
Good morning. I am shooting this beautiful stream of water as it goes out into the ocean here, and I have my camera set up really low. I'm also using a circular polarizer filter to help reduce the glare on the water. I have 2 neutral density filters because I want a slightly longer shutter speed than I can get with a little bit of sunlight I have this morning. And I have a graduated neutral density filter that's bringing down the brightness of the sky and of the water in the distance too. Now, to get the shot I want this morning, I need to start by setting up my composition. That's step 1, right? So like I said, I have my tripod nice and low. I have my camera set up so that I'm capturing this stream in the lower right-hand corner, and it's kind of pulling you into the frame as you go out into this beautiful scene in front of me. I've got my composition set up. Step 2 is to check out my focal length. Okay, I'm using my 16 to 35 lens, and I have it set to 16, as wide as I can go with this lens, okay? I have my aperture set to that sweet spot of f8. So, with an aperture of f8 and a focal length of 16 millimeters, my hyperfocal distance is right around 6 feet. So that means I need to focus at 6 feet and check to make sure nothing in my scene is closer than half that, which is 3 feet. I think that this little ledge of rock right here might be just a little bit closer than 3 feet. So I'm actually going to bump up my aperture to f16. Okay, there it is at f16. And of course, if I do that, I have to adjust my shutter speed as well. So I'm going to keep an eye on my histogram, adjust my shutter speed to about 5 seconds. So now that I've adjusted my aperture to f16 and my shutter speed to about 5 seconds, I need to remember that my hyperfocal distance has changed, right? So at f8, it was 6 feet. At f16, it's half that. Now my hyperfocal distance is 3 feet. I focus at 3 feet, and I need to check that everything in my frame is within my near focus distance, which is 1.5 feet now. This rock ledge, definitely I'm good. I'm within that range. Nothing is closer than 1.5 feet from my lens. And now I need to make sure I adjust my focus, right? I adjusted my aperture, which means I need to adjust both my shutter speed and my focus. Let's go ahead and set my focus to about 3 speed. I'm going to guess it's right over there, right about there. I set my focus using autofocus, and then I set my focus to manual so that when I press my shutter release, it won't change. And now I can fire off my shot, wait for that 5-second shutter speed, and see if I like it. I do. I like it. Nice, smooth flow lines, and I'm perfect. Now, here's the thing. On a morning like this, when the light is changing fast, I'm in a hurry, I want to get several different compositions, I have my camera set up, and I can just get up and move to take my next shot without adjusting anything on my camera. The only thing I have to be careful of is that I'm making sure that nothing within my frame is closer than my near focus distance of 1.5 feet. Now, as long as I keep this camera setup, my focal length and my aperture as they are, I don't have to adjust my focus as long as nothing within my frame is closer than my near focus distance of about 1.5 feet, okay? Now, I do want to change a couple of other things. I can adjust my circular polarizer, because for this shot, I don't want the circular polarizer effect. I want the reflection off that little tide pool here. I think it's really nice. And I can adjust my shutter speed if I want. And in this case, because the light is getting a little brighter minute by minute, and because I removed the circular polarizer effect, I want to reduce my shutter speed. I can see from my histogram that this is going to be a little bit overexposed, so I'll reduce that exposure, and I'm going to adjust my filter. So you can see I can move all kinds of things as long as I don't mess with aperture, focal length, or focus. Okay, those 3 things. Now remember, when I was shooting before, I set my focus using autofocus at my hyperfocal distance, and then I set my focus to manual so that when I press my shutter release, it won't change. So when I press my shutter release now, I'm not going to have a problem. I'll be able to fire off a shot and get exactly what I want.
So now we have given you an overview of all the focus options that you have. Once you master these advanced focusing techniques, don't think that you have to get everything sharply in focus. We often produce photos which are blurry on purpose, or we use a selective focusing technique to highlight a part of the image and blur out the rest of the image so that they remove distractions. You can also combine images with different depth of field to produce an artistic image. At Visual Wilderness, we have 2 incredible focus tutorials that steps you through from focus setting to focus modes and advanced focusing techniques like focus stacking and hyperfocal distance. Click on the link below to get more information about these tutorials and more at Visual Wilderness. All right, so let me stop this share. And I know there was some questions about focus calculations and things. So let me give you guys a little bit of overview as to what we do. We do not memorize tables for hyperfocal distance, nor we do carry an app or any other settings. What we do is we remember hyperfocal distance for like 2 or 3 focal lengths, and everything else is sort of derived from that. Now, when you're using hyperfocal distance for the first time, or when we teach our students first time, we give a simple 4-step workflow that says, hey, start with your composition, then go to F8. If it doesn't work out, then go to F16 or F11, and then set your focus accordingly. Very simple, fairly easy way to do this. But we also tell you how to estimate distance in the field. You know, first-time staffers, when they come with us, they are so concerned about getting the distances just right. But remember, hyperfocal distance, the way it works is that if you're not sure, you always fall back and estimate the distances a little bit further away. And trust me, everything will work out correctly. And there is, in our tutorial, I give a very detailed explanation of why this is the case. You'll see some pictures and you'll see some really detailed videos as to why estimating a distance conservatively is for the best option for using hyperfocal distance. Now, hyperfocal distance is not the end all and be all of what we do. We will do focus stacking. We will do multiple depth of field images. And one of the skills that you as a photographer will have to know is how do you get these images in Photoshop and then combine them together. So we have a video tutorial on sale from David, who actually works through a number of different scenarios for this kind of combination. Now, a lot of people will say, hey, focus stacking is for getting everything sharply in focus, right? Well, not really. Landscape photography, like really stunning landscape photography, also uses selective focus. Now, when you're using selective focus with wide angle lens, you may not get focus just the way you want it, or let me rephrase that. You may not get the blur just the way you want it, right? Sometimes the blur will be a little bit less, sometimes it's a little bit more, and you don't really know. So oftentimes what we'll do is we will not only change depth of field using aperture, but we'll also use specialized lenses, or we'll change our focus setting, or we'll wait set period of time when things go in and out, especially if the subject is moving, and then use Photoshop layers and masks to combine these together, okay? So all of that case studies are covered by David. So let me give you guys an example of what we do in the field and show you how David Johnston approaches this, all right? So let me share my screen again with you guys, and I'm going to play this video and I'll answer the COC question after the video is playing. So give me a second. All right, so let's see, share screen. All right, now in this particular example, what David's going to do is he's going to use Photoshop to combine two images with different focus points together to create an ultra sharp image. And when you see the photo of the windows in Priya, you'll notice why he wants the sharpness to be there, because the entire photo is about textures and details. Okay, so let's see. I don't know if I turn on my sound, so somebody will have to tell me if you guys can hear the sound. Can you guys hear the sound for the video?
In this case study, I want to talk about an image that was shot at the windows of Paria, and one of these things that I like to do when I am dealing with focus stacking, in this case study in particular that we're going to get to, is using the sharpest area of focus within my aperture to create a tack sharp image. Now, you may think when you are close to something that using something like f8 is really going to give you a lot of focal depth within your shot, and that is true. But to get tack sharp focus, sometimes you just need a slight alteration to your focus to really get that focus from acceptable to exceptional. So we're going to look at this image from the windows of Paria right now, and I'm going to go to this one. And if I just scroll through these, it's barely noticeable, but with an aperture of f8, there is a very slight difference in focus from the foreground to the background. So what I'm going to do is edit the first image in the sequence first to stick with our focus stacking workflow. So I'm going to work with this image first. I'm going to go to Develop. And what I'm going to do here is try to bring out a lot of this detail and a lot of the contrast between these lines here, and then we have a really cool foreground that goes back throughout the frame that I want to bring out a lot of detail in that too, so we have a really dynamic image here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring down the exposure just a little bit, since this was exposed to the right, and I'm going to increase my contrast on this, increase my highlights some, decrease my shadows to just get a lot of depth into my shadows as well, increase my whites, and decrease my blacks, just slightly trying to create a little bit more contrast in between my sliders as well. And since this was shot at ISO 100, I'm not too concerned about image noise, but just to be sure, I'm going to zoom in and just see in these back areas if there is any noise showing up, and I don't see any there, so I'm good with that. So the next thing I want to do is come over here to clarity, and with the clarity, I'm just going to increase this. You know, my goal here with clarity is to get a lot of these cracks and depth showing up throughout the foreground, and also separate the lines and tones that are in the rocks here and have those really show up well. Then I'm going to increase my vibrance and increase my saturations. And that looks pretty good. I like how this orange and red really shows up at the top of the frame and how we have that coming in too. And there's a lot to like about this image as well. One of the things that I do want to do is just adjust the tint slightly and the temperature slightly as well to make it a little bit more magenta and yellow to really bring out a lot of those tones. And then I'm going to come down here to my HSL sliders, and I'm going to adjust my saturations of my reds, my oranges just a little bit, and my yellows as well, and really make those pop. And then lastly, my purples and my magentas in this as well. So if we go back to the library, you can really see the difference here in these two edits. I can zoom in on this one that we just edited, and then back on the first one. And you can just see the stark difference in what you can do with editing. So to be sure that both of these photos have the same edits, we're going to do our settings sync. So I'm going to double click on this, have this first image selected, hold down my shift key and select the second one, and I'm going to go to sync settings and go to synchronize. Now this is going to synchronize these to be sure that they look the same. Now what I'm going to do is right click, go to Edit In, and open as layers in Photoshop. Remember, sticking with this workflow is going to help you practice this and get you very comfortable with both merging and focus stacking your images and also doing manual blends of your images to get the right focus in each of your photos that you create. So it's really important to follow along with the workflow and get very comfortable with how you're editing your images in post-processing. So now once these are loaded as layers in Photoshop, I'm just going to follow my workflow here. Since there isn't a ton of difference between the f8 aperture that we use to photograph this, you know, the foreground shot and the background shot are so close together, there's not that much range in what we are actually trying to focus stack here. So it's going to be really simple for Photoshop to see that and say, okay, I'm just going to do an auto blend of this and have this show up properly. So what I'm going to do is select both of these layers. I'm going to go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, and Auto. And I would just be very surprised if there was a big difference in the alignment on these two layers, but we'll see what Photoshop comes up with. Okay, so like I thought, there's not any difference in the alignment here, so I'm good to go on that. With these still selected, I'm just going to go to Edit, and I'm going to go to Auto Blend. Remember, we're doing stacking images, not panorama. So I'm going to hit OK, and Photoshop, again, is going to do its thing and auto blend these. Now, there's going to be a slight difference between the foreground and the background that it'll auto mask out. But this is, again, just giving us that assurance, that insurance policy to be sure that we get tack sharp focus throughout the entire scene here. Okay, so now that these layers are blended, you can see which areas are in focus and which areas are out of focus on each one based on the masks here. Not a huge difference, but it does ensure us that we do have tack sharp focus throughout the entire image. So I'm just going to go to File, Save, and that's going to save over in Lightroom, where I am going to make my final adjustments to this image. Now, there's not a lot that I want to adjust here, just because very basic edits did a very good job of editing this image, but there are some things that I want to do here. One of the things that I always preach in photography is remove any distraction or clutter. And I do that typically through the crop process. So once I have this image in the develop module, what I'm going to do is go to crop, and I'm just going to pull this in a little bit, because this little area where you have this just distraction in the lines is a little bit distracting to the overall composition. So I'm just going to pull this crop in a little bit. I'm going to hit OK. And then finally what I'm going to do is a little bit of dodging and burning here. So I'm just going to reset everything that I have in my adjustment brush. I'm going to pull my exposure down just slightly here. And I'm going to paint this darker exposure into this foreground area just to make it a little bit darker, bring out maybe a little bit more contrast too. Just a very vague general painting job here, not my best for sure. I can darken that a little bit and then also increase the contrast down in it. And then what I'm going to do is go to new brush, and I'm going to increase the size just a little bit. I'm just going to paint this outer rim, but instead of darkening it like I'm painting it in just to see where I am painting right now, what I'm going to do is get that back to 0 and increase that just a little bit and actually increase the clarity on it to make those details on the outer edge of that pop a little bit more. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same two brushes that I just did, but with these rocks up here. So the darker area, I'm just going to very generally paint these in where it may be a little bit darker, maybe in these shadowed areas. And then I'm going to select this lighter brush, and I'm just going to paint that in to maybe like down here on these very edges of the rocks, just very loosely so you can't really tell where it's been painted in and where it hasn't. So there's your final image here, a really good representation of when you do have some slightly out of focus areas, but using our workflow, we're able to bring those out, and where you had that area of out of focus in the back left corner in the top, we brought that out and got it into sharp focus so that we do blow this up and put it on the wall. We can be sure that the whole thing is within tack sharp focus, and we're making sure that we have sharp images throughout the entire scene.
All right, so that was a really simple workflow that David was showing us, right? His tutorial also covers cases where, let's say you have to do focus stacking and a exposure compensation, like, focus stacking and auto exposure bracketing at the same time. So some parts, some images will be in focus near to you, and then you have a series of images that are exposure bracketed. How do you combine these together? So there's a super nice case study in this tutorial that actually shows you how to do that. And it's actually the same workflow that you saw in this. He follows exactly the same workflow and say, this is how you end up doing it. Another case study is when I was in Iceland, I used a special lens, a lens baby lens, to take some really artistic photos of Skogafoss. And those can be combined to get everything sharply in focus. And he uses his workflow to show you how to do that. So the reason we don't use LR is, as far as I know, and this was true when we created the video, the LR doesn't let you do work on multiple images together. So Photoshop is probably a better choice for doing creative stuff like this, and always has been. All right, so this brings us to end of our tutorial. Like I said, I will post the link if you guys are interested in getting our tutorials for you. You can go to this link, and they'll be available on sale for the next 48 hours. Now, we do have a lot of people still hanging out, so let's see. Do you guys have any questions about focus? In particular, hyperfocal distance, how do you get focus if I do this? Is it a good idea to hand hold a camera after drinking 5 beers? You can use your chat box to put the questions in. It's never a good idea to hand hold your camera after drinking 5 beers, but I have taken photos when I had a champagne glass in the hand and I was going on a cruise and gotten some really good shots. All right, if you guys don't have any questions, we're going to end this session. Look for our upcoming webinar. I think the next one is on the 17th. Is the link not working for everybody? I thought the website is up. The special offers link's not working. I can see it. Joe, the hyperfocal distance, you can purchase it. Yeah, so Ellie, if the link is not working, try doing it. You just go to Visual Wilderness and you'll see a special offers page right on the front page, and you just click on that. All right. Joe, you can actually purchase hyperfocal distance all on its own for just $39. It's on sale right now. So no need to purchase a bundle, right? So each of the tutorials can be purchased separately, or you can just subscribe to our streaming program. If you do subscribe to the streaming program, all the future updates, as well as any other tutorials we produce while you're active, will be free. All right. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Look for our next tutorial on the 17th, and I hope to see some of you then. Bye, everyone.